My name is Michael, I'm 25, and I work in an office. Pretty typical, right? Nothing particularly unusual or remarkable about me. Just an ordinary guy who recently moved into a new apartment. I'd been saving for years, and though I couldn't afford anything luxurious, I managed to find a cozy little place in an older building, the kind people like to call charming. But that was fine by me. Spacious rooms, a nice kitchen, and a small balcony that I'd converted into a little reading nook. Honestly, I thought I'd lucked out. For the first couple of days, everything was quiet. I got into my usual routine of coming home from work, making tea, and settling in. But then, things started happening. Little things at first, things that could be explained away. The first odd incident was the window. I remember coming home one evening around 6, and finding the living room window open. I know I hadn't left it open, it was the middle of autumn, and I kept everything closed to keep the warmth in. But that day, the window was wide open, and a cold breeze swept through the apartment. I shook it off, thinking maybe I'd left it open and simply forgotten. I was stressed after all. Long hours, tight deadlines. It was easy to imagine my mind playing tricks on me. But that wasn't the only thing. That same night, as I sat down with my tea, I heard footsteps. Just faint, soft sounds, like someone walking around the room, pausing here and there. My heart pounded as I listened, holding my breath. But when I got up to check, the room was empty. It must have been the pipes, I told myself. Old buildings are full of weird noises, right? Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Every night, there were new sounds, soft tapping on the walls, faint whispers in the quiet. I could feel the air grow heavy as if something, or someone, was watching me. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, straining to listen. But nothing would come, just the oppressive silence. I told myself I was just stressed, that I was tired and imagining things. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. After a few sleepless nights, I started to question my sanity. It seemed ridiculous, but the feeling of being watched, of something moving around the apartment, was growing stronger. I'd feel sudden chills, or catch strange shadows out of the corner of my eye. It felt like the apartment itself was changing, becoming darker, colder. I couldn't keep this to myself anymore. My friend Ben worked as a doctor in the local hospital, and though it was a bit embarrassing, I told him about what was happening. I expected him to laugh, but he didn't. Instead, he agreed to come over and check things out himself. The evening he came over, the apartment felt different. It was quieter than usual, as if the building itself was listening. We sat in the living room, making small talk as I poured him a cup of tea, but I could tell Ben was uneasy. His eyes kept darting around, and he seemed to listen to the silence in the same way I did. Then it happened. The TV, which I'd turned off hours ago, flickered on by itself. The screen glowed with static, filling the room with an eerie light. Ben's face went pale, and he glanced at me with wide eyes. "You didn't?" he asked, voice trailing off. I shook my head, my heart pounding in my chest. As if on cue, we heard the footsteps again. Slow, deliberate, moving from the kitchen towards us. Ben's face was a mixture of fear and confusion, his hands shaking as he gripped his tea. The footsteps stopped just outside the living room. There was a heavy silence, and then knock, 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 3 taps against the wall. Ben bolted out of his chair, muttering something about needing to get home. He left so quickly he didn't even finish his tea. I could hardly blame him. Whatever was happening in this apartment was beyond explanation. After Ben's visit, I was more convinced than ever that something was seriously wrong with my apartment. I tried telling myself it was just an electrical issue or maybe some weird acoustics in the old building. But the events grew stranger, more intense. One night, I was lying in bed when I felt a weight settle beside me, like someone sitting on the edge of the bed. My eyes flew open, and I sat up, expecting to see someone. But there was nothing, just the empty room and the eerie silence. I could still feel the indentation on the mattress, the lingering chill where something or someone had been. That was the last straw. I couldn't stay there anymore. I decided to sell the apartment, even if it meant taking a loss. But that was easier said than done. Every buyer who came to view the place would suddenly back out. Some would leave in a hurry, making weak excuses about needing more time to think. Others would get visibly uncomfortable the moment they walked in, eyes darting around as if sensing something wrong. One couple even got sick on the spot and had to leave before seeing the whole place. It was as if the apartment itself didn't want anyone else to move in. Months went by, and I was starting to lose hope. I was desperate to leave, but it seemed like the apartment had a hold on me. Then, finally, a buyer came along. He was a quiet guy, younger than me, with a serious expression. He barely asked any questions, just nodded as he walked through the rooms. I half expected him to change his mind like all the others, but he didn't. He agreed to buy the apartment on the spot. I practically threw a discount at him just to get him to finalize the deal. I wanted out, and I didn't care what it took. He signed the papers without a second thought, and I handed over the keys, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over me. As I was about to leave, the man looked at me, his gaze piercing. "You saw them too, didn't you?" he asked, his voice low. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. "Saw what?" "The others. They're here. They've always been here." With that, he turned and walked into the apartment, closing the door behind him. I left without looking back, a cold sweat running down my spine. I moved into a new place, far from that cursed apartment, and tried to rebuild my life. But the memories wouldn't leave me. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, hearing faint footsteps, or feel the weight of something pressing down on my bed. The sense of being watched lingered, like a shadow I couldn't escape. One night I received a letter. It was from the buyer of my old apartment. The handwriting was shaky, the ink smudged in places as if written in a hurry. "They don't want me here," it read. "They say it's you they want. They're waiting. They'll always be waiting." I burned the letter, hoping that would be the end of it. But deep down I knew the truth. Some things once seen can never be unseen. Some places once entered can never be escaped. And somewhere, in the silence of the night, I still hear the footsteps. Moving into my new apartment was supposed to be a fresh start, but it didn't feel that way. The first night, I barely slept, haunted by memories of that eerie place I'd left behind. The sense of relief I'd felt was quickly fading, replaced by a gnawing unease that I couldn't shake. Maybe it was just the trauma, the lingering paranoia from my time there. But then the dreams started. It began as a faint sense of something wrong, something lurking just out of sight. In my dream, I was standing in my new living room, but it wasn't quite right. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting like lungs, and the floor creaked as if something heavy was moving below it. I tried to walk, but my feet felt glued to the ground. That's when I heard it. The sound of footsteps, soft and slow, coming closer. I couldn't move, couldn't even turn around, but I felt it. A presence creeping up behind me, breathing down my neck. Just as I felt icy fingers graze my shoulder, I woke up, drenched in sweat, my heart racing. I tried to tell myself it was just a nightmare, a figment of my overactive imagination. But when I looked around, I saw a single footprint in the dust by my bed. It wasn't mine. The nights grew longer. Every time I closed my eyes, the same dream would return. Each time, the footsteps were closer, the presence more palpable. I began to dread going to sleep, afraid of what might be waiting for me in the darkness. I was exhausted, barely making it through my days at work, and my colleagues started to notice. One night, after a particularly brutal day, I decided I couldn't do it anymore. I needed sleep, real sleep, without nightmares. I took a sleeping pill, hoping it would knock me out completely. It worked for a while. But then I heard them. I woke up in the middle of the night, my body heavy and my mind foggy from the medication. The apartment was pitch black, and everything was silent, except for the voices. They were whispering, soft and urgent, as if having a conversation just out of earshot. I strained to listen, catching only fragments. "He left us. Not safe. Bring him back." My heart pounded as the whispers grew louder, more insistent, surrounding me, filling every corner of the room. I bolted upright, fumbling for the light switch, but when I flipped it on, there was nothing. Just the empty room and the hum of the fridge in the kitchen. The voices were gone. But when I looked in the mirror above my dresser, I froze. Written in faint condensation on the glass, as if someone had traced it with a finger, were the words, "You belong here." I wiped the mirror clean, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination, but my hands were shaking. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't forget those words. I began avoiding my apartment as much as possible, staying late at work and crashing at a friend's place whenever I could. But eventually, I knew I'd have to face whatever was happening. I returned one night, feeling like a stranger in my own home. The air was thick, almost stifling, as if the walls themselves were closing in. That's when I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, by the hallway leading to my bedroom, a figure was standing in the shadows. It was tall and unnaturally thin, with limbs that seemed too long, too stretched. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound. It simply stood there, watching me with eyes that seemed to glint in the dark. I tried to speak, to demand that it leave, but no sound came out. My voice was gone, strangled by fear. Then, in one fluid motion, the figure turned and glided down the hallway, disappearing into the darkness of my bedroom. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to know what it was, what it wanted from me. I took a hesitant step forward, then another, until I was standing in the doorway of my bedroom. The room was empty, but the air was freezing, and the faint smell of rot lingered in the air. I checked every corner, every shadow, but there was no sign of the figure. Just as I was about to turn and leave, I noticed something scratched into the wall beside my bed. For simple words that made my blood run cold. "Why did you leave?" I couldn't take it anymore. The dreams, the whispers, the shadow figure. It was as if the entity from my old apartment had followed me. I knew I couldn't run from it forever. I had to confront whatever was haunting me. Driven by desperation, I made the decision to go back. I needed to know if the new tenant, the quiet man who'd bought the apartment, was experiencing the same horrors I had. Maybe he could tell me what was really going on. The old apartment building loomed before me, its walls casting long shadows in the dim evening light. As I approached, I felt a strange mix of dread and nostalgia, a familiarity tinged with fear. I knocked on the door, half hoping he wouldn't be home. But after a moment, the door creaked open, and there he was, the buyer, looking worse for wear. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his face was pale, almost gaunt. He didn't look surprised to see me. "They're angry," he said, without any greeting. His voice was hollow, almost resigned. "They don't want me. They want you." My stomach dropped. What are they?" He looked over his shoulder, as if afraid they'd hear. "They're the ones who were here before. The ones who never left." He paused, then whispered, "They said they'll only stop if you come back." I took a step back, the reality of his words sinking in. They wanted me to return. They wanted me in that apartment. Forever. Without another word, I turned and ran, the sound of his voice calling after me. "You can't escape them. They'll always find you." Back in my own apartment, I knew I was out of options. Running hadn't worked. Avoiding the truth hadn't worked. It was time to face whatever was haunting me, once and for all. I closed all the windows, turned off the lights, and sat in the center of the living room, waiting. The silence grew thick, oppressive, until it felt like I was underwater, every breath a struggle. Then, the air grew cold. The lights flickered, and I heard it, the familiar sound of footsteps. But this time they were everywhere, surrounding me, closing in. Shadows flickered at the edges of my vision, and I could feel them, the presence of the others, those who had never left. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice trembling. The shadows shifted, and for the first time, I heard their voices clearly, overlapping, whispering in a mournful, ghostly chorus. "You left us. You left us alone." I closed my eyes, the weight of their sorrow pressing down on me. "I didn't mean to. I didn't know." The voices grew louder, angrier, filling my head until I thought I would go mad. "Return to us," they demanded. Come back. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. With a surge of determination, I opened my eyes and stood, defying the darkness around me. No, I won't go back. You can't make me. The shadows writhed, the temperature plummeting, but I held my ground. I had spent too long living in fear, letting this presence control my life. Whatever they were, whoever they were, they no longer held power over me. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the shadows receded. The cold lifted, and the oppressive silence faded into normalcy. I was alone in my apartment once more, the haunting presence gone. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of peace. Whatever haunted me had finally accepted my refusal. I didn't need to go back. I was free, or so I thought.